I'd like to also like to send my thoughts and sympathies to the people of Turkey and Syria who have been so badly impacted by Monday's devastating earthquakes. The huge loss of life and utter destruction are truly horrific and absolutely heartbreaking. I think we all share that sentiment. Taoiseach, I want to raise the AG's report into the nursing home and disability payment scandal. It's not surprising that the AG has provided such a staunch defence of the legal strategy that was devised and endorsed by his own office and successive governments over many years. However, what does come as a surprise is how incredibly blinkered the report is. Throughout the report, cost containment is repeatedly conflated with public interest. In summary, keeping costs down is good, screwing over vulnerable citizens is legally sound. Even in the case of the state effectively illegally stealing disability payments from the most vulnerable citizens, the AG tells us there is no positive legal obligation to repay those funds. This is a case, even you said so yourself last week, Taoiseach, that it's a case that doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. I have been thinking about that line since I read it in the report, no positive legal obligation. And I have to say, I find that really extraordinary. This is a bald admission that the state had no valid legal authority to withdraw the meagre disability payments from an extremely vulnerable citizens who are in residential care, and no strict legal duty to repay that money, so effectively it didn't bother. I wonder how that defence would have gone down if the banks had tried to use it, for example, in the tracker mortgages that we've just heard about. Large institutions with much deeper pockets than the impoverished consumers is ripped off, effectively saying, if you think you were badly treated, well then come and sue us individually. Would you have been happy to see the banks adopt that scorched earth approach rather than, and it has to be said belatedly so, identifying the customers who were impacted and paying redress as well as the large fines imposed by the regulator? In this case, we have the state behaving with less of a moral compass than the banks, which I find really is saying something. What the AG fails to grasp is that only a small minority of people have the capacity to even contemplate suing the state. The state wouldn't lose its house at the end of the legal proceedings, but those suing might. Irish people don't expect or want the state to force the most vulnerable citizens to litigate to enforce their legal rights and entitlements. We expect the state to defend and vindicate the rights. At the very least, we expect the state to own up to its wrongs and to undo those wrongs. The legal strategy here is not something that's complicated or knowledgeable in terms of the legal formulation. It was very simple. Keep your head down. Let's hope we get away with it. And having ripped off all those vulnerable people. And I'm asking you, Taoiseach, are you still happy to stand over that strategy, having read the AG's report and with that defence?
Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks, Deputy, for raising this issue again. And I do want to emphasise that this is largely an historic issue. It relates to nursing home charges prior to 2005, so that's over 18 years ago, and disability payments prior to 2007, or perhaps even prior to 1996. And this largely relates to laws from the 1970s. We don't have all the facts yet. In fact, nobody does. As I said last week, we will do whatever is legally required, just and in the public interest. The AG's report is now published. It takes about 20-25 minutes to read. I'd encourage anyone to read it from cover to cover. The House can debate it tomorrow. I know the Joint Oireachtas Committees will want to discuss this matter as well. And the Ministers for Health and the Minister for Social Protection are going to study this matter and revert to Government with a further report in under 3 months. I do think there are some important points from the AG's report that are worth putting on record of the House. First of all, the AG points out very clearly that the state's only interest is the public interest. There is no other interest that the state can have regard to than the public interest. And that does mean taking into account the justice of any claims on the state, made by people on the state. It means taking into account the taxpayer as well, and also means taking into account those who depend on public services today, like children in our schools, patients in our hospitals, older people who need home care. He points out that anyone taking a case or defending a case has a legal strategy. So whether you're taking a case against the state or you are the state, you have a legal strategy. That is confidential and the fact that it is confidential or secret is not sinister in any way. He also points out that anyone taking a case or defending a case has privilege, and it wouldn't be fair for anyone to expect one side to waive privilege if the other is not willing to do so. He also points out that cabinet documents are confidential and are protected by the Constitution, and even the government does not have the authority to release them. He also points out that the state is not a normal litigant. I've heard people describe the state as being callous or operating like a company in the way it defends cases. That isn't the case. All the time, the government takes a decision to do things that it's not legally required to do so. We have a 100% redress scheme for MICA and for people who live in defective apartment blocks. No court has found, nor would any court find, that the state, central government, is 100% responsible for that. And there are other examples, for example, like the Symphysiotomy scheme established by Minister Riley and followed through by me when I was Minister for Health, that provided a redress scheme, even though the women concerned, with one extreme exception, lost all their cases in court. And we have other schemes as well, Mother and Baby Homes Institution scheme, for example, where the Commission investigation found many people responsible for what happened there, but only the state has stepped forward in terms of funding a redress scheme. And he also points out, which I think is important, is that in settling a case, it is essentially a compromise. Settling a case doesn't mean that you're accepting that you're in the wrong. It is done by agreement on both sides. Cases can't be settled unless both sides agree to the settlement. Nobody can be forced to a settlement. They're always free to have their case tested in court, and these cases may yet be tested in court.
Deputy Murphy.
Taoiseach, I'm well aware that this strategy has been in place for some years. Can you tell us exactly what it is that the Ministers for Health and the Minister for Social Protection are going to be looking at for the next 3 months? Is it the AG's report? Is it the substance of the issue? Are they looking at identifying individuals who may well have been impacted? Are they looking at the possibility of repayment? Exactly what is it? I wonder if the same positive legal obligation was considered when the repayment of junior bondholders was being considered, because people are validly making a comparison between the two and how the state treated the two. And there are others that feel that this delay and deny tactic is repeatedly used in terms of the state's strategy. For example, the 100 personnel encasement aerodrome who over a 20-year period have prematurely died. And it's down to the individuals or the individuals' families. It's about how the state treats its citizens. So can you tell us exactly what it is the two ministers are going to be looking at?
Thank you, Deputy.
In terms of, is it just the AG report or is it more?
Taoiseach.
In relation to junior bondholders, that there was a positive legal obligation in many of those cases, and there was a court case taken which unfortunately went against the state in regard to some of those cases. But leaving that aside, ministers are going to look at this in the round. Of course, it isn't going to take them 3 months to look at the AG's report, but they will have to look at a lot of documents going back to the 1970s and 1980s, and they will listen to what the House has to say and what people say at the Joint Oireachtas Committee. In relation to the DPMA payments, again, important to say that this is an historic issue, relates to the period before 2007, and the partially leaked draft memo didn't cover all of the facts. One thing we know now just since then is there actually were 3 periods involved. A period between 83 and 96 when the law was one thing, a period between 96 and 99 when the law was another thing, and a period between 1999 and 2007 when the law was different again. And that just gives you an example of how much more complexity there is to this and how much more truth there is to this than what has been presented in certain places in recent times.